was in 1919, 20 years ago, that a young southpaw named George Herman Ruth was taking his turn on the mound for the Boston Red Sox and doing all right. He had a fast breaking curve and plenty of zip, but he had something else. A pair of hands and a flair for knocking the apple out of the ball yard. So the Red Sox lost a pitcher and gained an outfielder, and baseball's immortal king of SWAT is on his way. Norwegian by birth, Notre Dame by adoption, the figure of Knute Rockne assumes greater stature with each passing year. In football, a master strategist, a dynamo force, yet loved to a point of worship by those whom he taught.
I don't want spring football unless you do. Now, all those in favor of coming out for spring football, those who insist on having football, insist on having Hunk and Shevin, Vadish and I take charge of this spring, will all signify by saying aye.
At Ebbetsfield, Brooklyn, against the Army in 1923, 4 horsemen running wild through the Cadet defenses. There's Crowley on a rampage. The Irish win 13-0. Destiny's favored thoroughbred, a war baby, foaled in 1917. And as would naturally attend a fellow born in such troubled times, the racing career of Big Red was a span of 2 crowded years. For it was after his campaign as a 3-year-old that Man o' War was retired to the stud, leaving behind him a glorious record of 20 victories in 21 starts. Today, amid the clover and Kentucky bluegrass of faraway farm, he whiles away the hours, carefree and contented in the twilight of his life. For Man o' War is now an old man, 22 years old.
You all set, boys? Yeah. Well, let's go.
Johnson, George Sisler, Christy Mathewson, Honus Wagner. Truly great names to head this scroll of honor, soon to be joined by the great players of today. Some of them will come from these American League clubs. Fenway Park, the Boston Red Sox, where Babe Ruth first became famous. Cleveland Stadium, home of the Indians, who have many promising young players. Griffith Stadium, the Washington Nationals, on the lookout for another Walter Johnson. Sportsman's Park, home of the St. Louis Browns, who have already sent George Sisler. Comiskey Park, Chicago White Sox, a team that has developed many great players. Shibe Park, Philadelphia Athletics. Manager Connie Mack has shown his players the way to the Hall of Fame. Briggs Stadium, Detroit. Ty Cobb led the way for the Tigers. Who will be next? Yankee Stadium, home of the world's champions. That speaks for itself. But there are still other fields outside of these clubs where new stars are in the making.
Yes, the chap likes to read. Besides, this mental relaxation is necessary because there's a hard day ahead. Now, when a fella gets tired of reading, there are lots of other things around a training camp to do. For instance, Joe plays a swell game of pool when he's in the mood. And incidentally, this is the only spot where he ever gets behind the 8-ball. Jitterbug Joe, he likes his swing music. In the ring, he swings without the music. But when he relaxes, he swings with it. And Joe has a collection of hot records he plays on his portable phonograph. Joe's footwork has earned the title of Shufflin' Joe. He knows how to handle his underpinnings, no effort wasted, no stumbling about. Looking around outside the ring, we find these lady visitors taking in the action. Joe moves in a semi-crouch, fists ready for anything. And the champ is really best at counterfighting. Lead to him, and he usually jolts you with a swift left jab or hook. When he whips across a murderous right, after that, curtains. Experts have raved over the marvelous accuracy with which Joe throws his punches. These workouts on the punching bag help to develop that. Notice that left. I said notice it, but don't ever get in front of it. Skipping rope is an old exercise for fighters. They do it even more than little girls, and much better, too. Skip, skip, skip. That develops the footwork. So the champion finishes his training day with flying colors. And need I mention that being a champ is no bed of roses.
Someone says that so-and-so was the greatest player the world of sport has ever known. Then the argument starts. You'd think the topic under consideration was the League of Nations, or what to do with Germany, or at least the subject of the fourth term. But no, these sports fans are losing their tempers and threatening to do each other bodily violence, all because of a difference of opinion over who was or is the greatest box office attraction in the entire history of sport. Is baseball where you'd find the king of sport? If so, who's the greatest player the great American pastime has ever produced? Well, most of us would name a man who started as a great left-hand pitcher and wound up as the Sultan of Swat, the Bambino, called by Grantland Rice the greatest sports headliner of all time. The greatest sports headliner of all time? Well, what about Joe DiMaggio? What about Honus Wagner? What about Christy Mathewson? It all depends on the point of view. I named Red Grange. For years, he was the idol of every sports fan in the country. But if Grange was tops, what about Tommy Harmon of Michigan? All-American triple threat. Or Ernie Nevers of Stanford. Bronco Nagurski of Minnesota. Don Hudson of Alabama. The fans will even fight over their favorite coaches. The relative merits of the Knute Rockne system against the one evolved by Pop Warner.
To the entrance of the stadium, the streets were one long stream of color. Green flagpoles bearing a scarlet banner with a swastika in the center were spaced every 50 feet. And at the entrance were the massed flags of 52 nations participating in the games. Through these flag-bedecked streets, the giant Hindenburg points the way to the arena. A runner with a flaming torch, which was lighted in Athens, birthplace of the Olympic Games, arrives at the Lust Garden to be saluted. From the archway of the Marathon Gate enters the athletes of 52 nations, led by the Greeks, as is their right for having originated the game. The champion of the '96 Olympiad walks in the costume of ancient Greece. The others follow in alphabetical order, with the French receiving the biggest applause. Great Britain receives a great ovation as they pass the dais. The Italians also received a rousing reception as they passed in review. Then came the boys and girls of the USA, 400 strong, second only to Germany in numbers. They received a cordial, if not overwhelming, welcome when their massive columns appeared. But just as their head arrived at the dais, the German contingent came into sight at the Marathon Gate. Immediately, the band stopped the march it was playing and broke into Deutschland über alles. The audience, rising promptly, froze into silent attention, so that the Americans marched not to applause, but to the German national anthem.